Hi, my name is Philip Kim. I'm with General Electric, and today's session will be on growth via applied analytics, where I'll be sharing with you the vision, the strategy, and the results of what we've done so far within General Electric. And hopefully you'll be able to apply this within your own organization to achieve some change and drive some additional results and benefits for your company. So with that said, before we get started, one of the exercises I like to always do is kind of figure out what's the relative value that you're providing through your analytics efforts. And so I posted up this little article to kind of give you a sense of how to kind of jokingly auction your services off and imagine what you might get via an auction. And so the good news is that you're probably in between my fictitious $2 bid and Warren Buffett's $3.4 million lunch bid. So an hour of your time is somewhere worth between that range. But it's important here as you go through your analytics journey that you need to understand if you were to get an auction offer from your president or from your leader, how much would you get? And using that number, it'll give you a sense of what you need to do next. So let's go ahead and figure out what it is that we did and why we did the certain things that we've been working on. One of the things that I came into this organization about 2.5 years ago was that we didn't really have a whole lot of vision or the strategy, and we need to come up with something that people could not only remember but could measure against. So we came up with these three pillars that we were going to work on projects that were going to deliver value, just as the preceding slide talked about. We're going to focus really heavily on driving adoption. General Electric is a very large company, and without the right level of adoption, any analytics project or any kind of project that we might undertake, if it doesn't scale, it's not going to survive. And lastly, we also knew that we're going to be a very specialized function, and that specialized function, however, has to feed into the general strategy, the general business strategy that General Electric follows. So we have a lot of operational rhythms, a lot of existing processes that we might support that don't necessarily feed directly into an analytics strategy. So we wanted to make sure that these three were our core pillars that we could not only drive our efforts toward, but that we could also measure ourselves against. And so that takes us to the next slide, which is, what were the results so far this year? And so every quarter we go back and review the projects, what they've done, what kind of impact and benefit they've had. And so in the last 9 months, our projects have had about a $10 million estimated benefit in terms of additional growth in sales and CM, saved about 2,000 hours in terms of productivity. That'll boil down to a lot of labor saving, but also a lot of waste, things that people could spend their time doing more value-added activities. We've got 15 power users, and that's growing. We've got 30-plus projects that's complete or a work in progress. And this is probably one of the key elements that I want to emphasize here is that it's not just the value, it's the fact that there are people outside of my team that can do this, that can do some of the projects, follow our templates and our guidelines, and more importantly, make a difference for the business. And that's really kind of a very important element to scaling across an organization diverse or large like General Electric. We also have a lot of different flavors of analytics projects that we've done over the last 9 months, but more important, over the last 2 years. A lot of them have spanned things like commercial analytics, sales, marketing, but we've also got ones around quality. We've had ones on customer tech support, manufacturing lines, and we'll go through a couple of those examples as well. But I think this is a reflection of the fact that we had a very strong pillar strategy, and then we focused our efforts on supporting the pillars that we could not only drive action toward, but also communicate what we were going to be doing as part of our team. So if you were to boil down those three pillars and say which was the most responsible for the $10 million in additional gain or the 2,000 hours in productivity, it probably would be driving adoption. A lot of these projects were done outside of my team. They were trained to use these tools, specifically Tableau. They were taught the benefits of using something like this to get to a faster, better resolution. And using that, they were able to find opportunities to make more money, save valuable time, and reduce costs. And adoption is intricately related to those functions. One of the things that I think I've seen a lot of other cross-functional organizations fail to achieve is communicating these benefits in a very simple manner. They get lost in terms of all the statistical tools and additional ways that you can analyze a problem, but they fail to really communicate that this project was going to make more money, that it's going to save valuable time, or it was going to reduce costs so the customer has a better cost-benefit experience. And I think communicating that to not only your stakeholders but across to your customers is something that any organization could improve upon. But say you've done that. Say you've had a terrific run at some of these projects. You've had terrific success driving sales growth. But if you look across your organization or your company, you realize you're really not that. So you're not surrounded by people like you. You're not surrounded by projects that you think you could potentially bring to the scope of the problem at hand for the business. So what if you're still alone on the road? And what I want to do is kind of talk through some of what I've seen before, and hopefully that might make sense to you. Sometimes not you. Sometimes it's just timing. And the example that I'm going to use is Warren Buffett's dinner or lunch that he puts up for auction every year. And so back in 2000, he put himself up for auction, and he sold for about $25,000. Next year, he sold for a little less than that. And then in 2002, he just made up the ground, went up to $25K. But it took 3 rounds, and fourth round he made a hit of $250,000. So he hit 10x. And then about 7 years later, he hit 100x. And what that really reflects is that everything has some sort of adoption curve associated with it. And there's a great book that you can look at called Crossing the Chasm that talks about this, an adoption life cycle. And it's usually used in reference to technology. There's really no reason why it can't apply to analytics. And so what I think it would be important for you as a leader of analytics and program management is to understand where are you on this curve. And as you understand where you are on this curve, the way that you need to work on your projects, the way that you need to bring on the stakeholders, it will take some time, but it also will change. And so understanding the change needs is something that is a fundamental talent that you need to either build or bring in. And so as you can see here that Warren Buffett, if you were to segregate his earnings for that 1 hour, you could argue that he went through several stages. And where he is right now is the late majority, where the vast majority of people who value his time are aware of it and they're willing to make advantage of this opportunity to meet him. So with that said, say that you're having some difficulty. Say that you're in the red zone, you're trying to cross that chasm, and you just haven't had a lot of success. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through some of the tools and techniques that we've used successfully within our organization. They may or may not apply to you. Some of this is really tied to the way that GE tends to approach a lot of this project, the culture that we have, the focus we have on data and data-based management. So we'll go through this, but hopefully some of this will be applicable to what you do on your own day-to-day jobs. So with that said, we focus on prioritization, and that is making sure that we have the right project based upon the right impact. We use a lot of lean. We use Agile, which for those of you who are familiar with it is really a very common technique used to develop software. And we also had a lot more of the storytelling, a lot more of the visual in mind when we went and built these projects. So we were very conscious of showing the results in such a visual way that they were appealing and impactful. So let's go ahead and take the first one. How do you come up with a consensus-based prioritization project? And that's a very challenging thing to do when you've got a large cross-functional group, different stakeholders, different timelines, perhaps even different time zones. And so what we do is we try to keep it as simple as possible. We generally start off with basically a blank template, except for the benefits and impact, where we're saying as a team, we're going to be focusing on making more money, saving valuable time, and reducing costs. Again, we're reusing the pillars and the actions that we had in the past. And then we also come up with a very simple forward blocker. Again, a very commonly used template across most businesses, where we put on the y-axis the impact. How much of an impact could this project be for us in one of those three measures? And then we also have another axis for the feasible. That is a judgment call that says, relatively speaking, how hard is this? And obviously what we end up doing here is we're going to segregate our projects in such a way that the easiest, most impactful projects have higher priority than the ones that have very little impact and are incredibly hard to do. Now, that's the template. Now, the way that you get the actual number of projects is you have the brainstorming session. And the brainstorming session actually has a very simple format. We teach our participants that we're going to follow a very simple question in action. That is, give me this so I can do this, and then this will be the benefit. So it's a question, answer, benefit. And that's the way that we structure the brainstorming. And the reason why that's so critical is that'll give everyone a quick sense without going into too much detail where you're paralyzed by the things that might stop you. This is more about the aspirational statement that says, here's why I want to do this. Here's how I would do this. Then you take that bullet and you put it on the map, and we actually do a very simple exercise where I literally put number 1, in this case, where are my best customers. I put it on the grid right in the center, and I move it. And I say, okay, tell me when you think the impact is high or low. And sometimes they'll tell me, just put it in the middle for now. And I'll put it in the middle. And then I'll ask for the team to tell me how hard it is. And they'll tell me, well, it's okay. It's not hard. It's not super easy. So put it in the middle. So one might be, in the beginning, right dead in the middle of the crosshairs, right in the middle of the axis for both Y and X. The second bullet comes in, and we'll talk about the fact that, oh, well, this one actually has a $50 million potential impact. So it's obviously comparatively much higher than one. And this is where it gets, obviously, the art of influencing is much more important than the actual math. I'm not setting a grid where the dollars are being tracked on the Y. I'm just trying to give a relative comparison that 2 is more impactful than 1. But if I also had to say how hard 1 was versus 2, I can get a judgment call from a number of the experts around the room that, generally speaking, 1 is a little easier, or at least moderately easier than 2. But that feasibility is far, far outweighed by the potential impact. And I think this is what you're trying to do, is get a very quick Pareto sorted list of the projects that everyone can agree to are the most impactful and the most feasible. It's a very simple template, but I find that this template serves very well when you're trying to figure out what to do next. The second tool that we use very successfully within General Electric is, again, a facet of our culture, which is to use Lean Six Sigma. And generally, for those of you who are not familiar in the room of what Lean does, it allows you to take a very complicated or very time-consuming process and simplify it. And by simplifying it, you eliminate waste, and you come up with a future state that is going to be much faster, much more streamlined, less error-prone. And this is typical of high transaction environments like marketing, sales, anything where you're trying to move data from one organization to another organization or transfer knowledge from a set of data sets into an action somewhere in the organization. And so Lean is a very good tool when you're trying to figure out how do you do this right? How do you solve it in such a way that you've got a very simple end state that people can invest and buy into? The second thing that works for us is that Lean typically requires $0 investment. That is, you can't come up with a solution that requires $3 million in BI work. It has to be something that you could do with a couple of pizzas in a late afternoon. And one of the things that we also add on our Lean outcome is we focus on what we call the minimally viable or zero-cost solution. So even if there is an ideal solution out there today, we try to get it to the one that we can get to with a reasonable budget without having anyone else outside the room need to be involved to make that decision. So we're very focused on things the team itself, the working team itself can accomplish. The third thing that we use quite extensively is Agile. And again, for those of you who are not familiar with Agile, it's really an iterative and incremental development approach for something that a small team is working on. And the reason we use it is that analytics is actually a pretty hard project to predict. That is, it's rare that you can find any one person who says it will take me 1 week to do this type of project, and this project will take me 13 months. And have both of them be equally accurate. The person who's going to quote the 1 week project is going to be much more likely to be closer as a percentage of the original time estimate as opposed to the person who's going to estimate the 13-month effort. And obviously it's because it's hard to predict all the roadblocks and errors, and that's why Agile exists today for software development. It's designed for hard to predict projects and problems, and it's preventative maintenance to make sure that you're not constantly returning the wheel, returning all the issues that you find with complex projects. So what we do is we set up a sprint planning session for an analytics project. We create the stories, we assign the hours, and the next day we start working. And every day we get together as a team and we figure out what are the accomplishments, what have I done today, what am I going to do tomorrow, and what's stopping me. And we literally have just those 3 questions. We keep doing that until we're done with the sprint, and at day 15, we set aside a couple of hours, and we look at the sprint as a postmortem. We look at what worked really well. So we want to make this a very collaborative, very positive feedback mechanism. And we say, well, I really like this. This was great. And by the way, Tom and Angela on that other side, they did this great project. I was really pleased with the way they did that. And it just keeps on going where you want to focus on what you want to keep doing. Then you spend a little bit of time thinking about things that didn't work so well, and you put them on the things that you want to try to prevent, and you come up with actually discrete steps that will prevent that from occurring. And then you show your work. And say that there are some stories that you've completely underestimated in terms of complexity. Maybe the benefit wasn't there. This is also the opportunity to either extend them or to kill them or split them. And so this is just a nice little process to allow a small team to collaborate and deliver working product in a very fast time cycle. That takes us to the visual. And this is the one thing that I've seen over and over again where I think our team has done a really good job. And to us, it seems much more of the art as opposed to science, where what we've found in our organization is that most of the useful analytics are really designed around simple questions. And so what we've decided to do is use simple visuals tailor-made to answer those questions. And without a lot of training or without going into statistical or numbers or anything like that, I think all of us would look at the first three questions, look at the first three pictures, and even if we couldn't necessarily agree on all the dimensions of the data, maybe the size of the goldfish, maybe how old the cat is, how many fish are in the third picture, all of us would probably come to the same conclusion and be able to answer the question in exactly the same manner based upon the way that we've laid it out. And I think that's one of the key things that we focus on is that we ask for the critical questions that form the foundation for that decision. And we do that in such a way because we know that there are a lot of data sets, a lot of reports out there that may not be strategic, it may not be relevant, and even if I answer them for you, you may not be able to do anything with it. So what we're trying to do here is really kind of integrate the art with data and storytelling. And then lastly, a little tip that we follow through is we label each of these visualizations, just like you see on the titles for the screenshots here. We put a very simple question that this pictorial or visual answers. Quick segue. One of the things that we also talk about in our group is we use Tableau for a lot of the visualizations for obvious reasons. It's great for fast charting, fast data aggregation, testing things out. But we also know that Excel is being used by the large majority of our stakeholders across General Electric, if not most of the world. And so we understand that. We spend some time mentoring the team about how to use that in such a way that they can prototype and iterate within Excel. And we also let them know that we can use that same data source in Tableau. And so we do it in such a way that we collaborate and help them with that. We help them draft those questions that, again, the Excel templates might answer. And we try to work with them to basically minimize some of the workarounds that they may be tempted to do using Excel. Some of which we're going to obviously be able to surpass with a programming environment or database environment or Tableau or a combination of all three. And that really takes us to the kinds of questions that we try to address with Tableau. Business-wide questions, we focus on using a lot of reduced converged data sets and abstract in such a way that they answer the questions. We prototype a lot within Tableau, and we try to provide a relevant 360-degree view of relevant factors whenever possible. So we might pull in macroeconomic data. We might pull in relevant transaction data. We might pull in warranty and sales costs. We might pull in where the locations of our sales teams are. Maybe third-party data from various the public sources or subscriptions that we might have. And we use that to basically provide as complete a picture as necessary to answer this question. There is one caveat that we're very conscious about, which is that high customization typically leads to high cost, and that's no different with any tool, including Tableau. So we're very focused on making sure that we iterate and prototype with the question in mind first. We don't do a lot of visualization without that question. We do have a couple of things that we know are issues within any kind of environment, and Tableau is no different. But when we know that there are some specific calculations or statistical analysis that needs to be done outside of the system, we do blanket some time to make sure that that's going to be a future feed. So we may put up a dummy proxy template data set, knowing that we're going to feed in that column later. And that's kind of the quick organizational review of some of the projects we've done, how we've done some of our projects, the way that we structure our project queue, and some of the visualizations. But I thought it might also be helpful for you to kind of see some of the pictures, screenshots of the visuals that we've actually done. And some of this has been kind of cleaned up to protect the innocent, but it will give you the sense of how we approach our projects in rules and that we use within Tableau. The first tip that we use is one question equal one picture. We don't try to boil the ocean. We don't try to provide every single piece of information you might ever actually have on one dashboard. We found that it's much more effective to focus on the simple questions that can and do drive the change in behavior. So this is an example where we have all of our customers who are under an active service contract plotted around the world today. And this was in response to a question about, where are my customers so that I can call them and make sure that they're happy and that they're getting the right level of service needs and so forth. So we were able to use Tableau and combine that information with some geocoding and put them on a map. And now we've got a navigation aid for our service support team. Number two is we try very hard to reuse paradigms to center around user experiences so we don't have to train anyone. So that the strong visual cue leads to a user where they don't have to be taught what to do, what to click, how to interpret this. And so we're very conscious of using the ones that we know that the users might be very familiar with. We'll look at the existing dashboards, existing acronyms that might exist. And obviously, without a whole lot of education, there are certain colors that work, certain comparative measures, whether you're closer to E or closer to F. And obviously, if you are really into custom dashboard designing, we could go so far as to replicate what you might see in an airplane cockpit. Obviously, that would be taken to an extreme. But if that's what we needed to do to make sure that nobody would need to open a user guide, that would be a path that we would be willing to consider. Tip number three, we typically embed a screenshot of the picture, and we put some very simple notes. Again, this is something that can be done very easily within Tableau, or you can just embed a screenshot within as an object within Tableau, basically outlining what is it that they're looking at and what they should be expecting to use. So we do have quite a number of users who access our dashboards using the Tableau server. And this way, they don't have to reach out to me saying, I'm kind of embarrassed to ask you, what does orange mean? What does this little crosshair mean? And we also might find that this particular type of format allows us to kind of anticipate some of the questions that we've already had. So we'll document, I get a lot of questions about the shape or sizes of the elements on the object. So we'll go ahead and put that on there as well. One of the things that we also are very conscious about is when we take all the requirements and dashboards and questions together, we try to figure out, is there a narrative? Is there a storyboard flow that kind of makes sense? And so in this example you're seeing here is we're trying to figure out, first of all, how big is the market? Where are my customers in that market? And how are we doing given those two factors? And that's really a very simple narrative of some very complicated dashboards and analytics that we perform. And we did that to keep things as simple as possible to communicate, but more importantly, it keeps us grounded in terms of what we're trying to do. One of the things that we're very conscious about is scope creep. So if we have a request that sounds reasonable, we have a lot of really good data, it's already there for us to put in the dashboard, but it doesn't fit the narrative or the storyboard, it gives us a check. It makes us kind of test ourselves to make sure that we're not adding something that might not necessarily be necessary. Number four, we always working, as I said, every quarter we review the benefits and the questions and the projects that everyone's taken on. We try to put together one or two slides that kind of communicate the benefits without going into Tableau, without going into all the navigation, just a screenshot that says, here's how it was used, here's the process that we're doing and the benefit. And again, it's meant to encourage adoption, but also encourages self-reporting of the successes that the various teams have had over time. Tip number five, one of the things that we focus on very carefully is that you don't want to give a false positive. You don't want to say something is happening when it's really not. And we found that with heat maps, that's something that happens accidentally. So what we'll do here is that we might use time series trending to show that there's really no extreme event that's been occurring over time. We'll show a stack bar with a running Pareto to show that there are size differences that might be throwing me off. That is, for example, if I've got an industry that is a large industry, a small change in that large industry could be enough to swing me over into what seems to be an incredible result. When you normalize it for the sales, it might not be. And so we try to be very careful of making sure that we're not misleading the user by giving them an extreme view of what might be a normal event. Tip number 6, this is probably my largest pet peeve, and for those of you who are big fans of Stephen Few, which I am, I'm sure you'll appreciate this as well. Use color sparingly. It's incredibly hard for any new user to understand in analytics, much less incorporate data with colors and all the various mismatches. So we're very conscious of using a limited palette. We don't break user paradigms whenever possible. So, green typically means things are good, and red typically means things are bad or not in a state that you'd want it to be, and yellow is a caution note. Now, you might use gradients, but certainly you want to probably keep it to those 3 boundaries if the questions are relevant to that. Sometimes you don't need color. If the question that you're trying to answer doesn't require color, you're better off actually using just one color versus trying to use all of the palettes that are available in Tableau, and there's a lot. So this is actually one of my pet peeves, that the power that you get with Tableau could actually be misused. We use maps, very interestingly enough, for convergence. There's a lot of data sets that really don't have any key or join fields that are useful, but they all share typically geography. And so in this case, what you're seeing is a map of the data from NOAA of Hurricane Sandy. And this dashboard right here, this view includes the surge or the flood surge that is anticipated based on that data over a Tableau map. And then you can see on the other tabs beneath that some of the potential customers that we think might be impacted. So again, a great little convergence study, very simple for us to take this data and then make that broadly available. Rules of 3. So I see a lot of people try to pack multiple worksheets into one dashboard. I try to limit to about 3. And sometimes we go up to as many as 4. And we don't restrict a user. They can add as many as they like, because as I said, we have a large number of power users around our business. But my own personal preference is to limit it down to about 3 worksheets, because I found that people tend to try to combine information naturally, and combining more than one, it becomes okay. 2, yes. 3, you're getting to the point where they're going to have to pause and think. But after 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, it's increasingly hard for a non-expert user to understand what's going on and what's important. And so what we do here is that we might have multiple dashboards. And again, that takes us back to the storyboard concept. We might have 3 views that tell one story, and then we'll switch to another dashboard that will tell another part of a very important piece of the story, or for drill down, and so on and so forth. Tip number 9. This is the one thing that we found as if we've become increasingly popular within our organization. So there's more demand than supply. You might want to pause and cut that one out. I'll repeat this slide again. So tip number 9 is about practicing skepticism. And so we've gotten to a situation where demand exceeds supply. We get a lot of requests to do projects of varying types from all over the world and all over different functions. But one of the things that we're very conscious about doing also is that we're not mirroring an existing function. We can make anything look pretty. We can make anything look visually attractive. However, having said that, if what we're doing is repeating a view that already exists today, that is, a user could take a look at this one view in a BI system or in Excel and take the same look in Tableau and really see nothing different except for the fact that it's pretty, it's more navigable, it's more accessible, we'd have to be very careful to identify what is the measurable benefit. Are we trying to save time? That might be a legitimate statement. Maybe we're trying to scale so that instead of a laptop, we're trying to scale to hundreds of users around the world. But we'd be very cautious. Tip number 10, and this is probably my least tangible slide, but this is really about what's your philosophy. Is your philosophy to try to repeat what you already know? Is it to go into uncharted territory trying to find an unknown fact that could be leverageable? And our philosophy has always been don't settle for boring. Aim for surprise. Aim for something that's counterintuitive. Look for projects that will change your knowledge, what you know, how you think, what you believe. And ultimately, a lot of this is going to be around, will this change what you do? And so we focus on this as kind of our philosophy of some of the analyst projects that we take on. If we love a vision, we love the surprise, we love the uncertainty, even if we don't have a lot of benefit or even if the project is very challenging, we might undertake it just because we think the potential is out there. Now, in order to make that happen, again, this is the least tangible slide here, this is really about people. You have to hire the right talent. They have to be not only skilled, they have to be passionate. They have to love doing this, otherwise the project will fail just because they'll be tired. This is an exhausting process to sometimes undertake. So they have to be passionate about their job, they have to love it, and ultimately they also have to be very comfortable with ambiguity. There's not enough data to answer all questions equally well to the 99th percentile. What we're going to have to really do in many cases is make judgment call, combine that with heuristics, combine that with data sets, and ultimately make more right decisions than wrong. But that requires a type of talent that's comfortable with that. And I think hiring the right people, staffing the organization, hiring the power users, and staffing the power users who are aligned to that is one of the key elements of being successful in analytics. So a quick recap. We talked about this very early on, but I want to make sure that we close with this, is you have to really know and set your value. A couple of ways to do that is obviously through a consensus that people agree that you're adding a lot of value and they think you've added, $10 million. The other one is to auction off your time. So we mentioned product prioritization. Once you follow that template for, say, one stakeholder, you could have the same workout with another stakeholder, and now you've got two competing bids. Maybe the first project is worth $10 million, and the second project is worth $50 million from a different group. Then you could probably argue that you've got a really big driver to do the $50 million benefit, and the $10 million will follow the next. So you can actually auction off your services using the templates that we've decided, shown before. Number two, align analytics to outcomes that the business can not only measure, but that you can measure as well. This is incredibly important when you're starting off early. It's very hard to justify 3, 4, 5 years down the road when you don't have any measurement as to why you need to expand your group or buy more tools. Number three, sometimes it's not you. Sometimes it just takes time. To use the Warren Buffett example, it took a couple of years for him to get to that 10x level, and it took almost a decade for him to get to the 100x. So that is typical of large, complicated undertakings or things where the users just don't get it just yet. So, but understanding where you are in that cycle will let you change your strategy. And then lastly, we talked about what we've used to successfully cross that chasm. Hopefully it's useful to you in your organization, but you can identify the ones that you feel would help you achieve the same results using a variety of different results. And then lastly, we went through top 10 tips that we've used successfully within Tableau. And so this concludes my presentation.